Thanks everyone for joining us for the National Conference of State Legislatures webinar today, entitled Working Smarter, Not Harder. Sorry about the delay on the technical difficulties. Hopefully everyone can hear me now, and if you can't, you will have no idea that I just asked you that. But let's just delve right into things. Today's webinar is hosted by NCSL's Young and New Professionals Group, dedicated to serving both new and next-gen legislators and legislative staff. To learn more about us, please visit our website at www.ncsl.org/YNP. So my name is Melanie Condon. I'm the co-coordinator of the YNP group here at NCSL. I'll be moderating today's webinar along with my YNP colleague, Stacy Householder. And today we're going to provide some tips for you guys on how to be more productive at work without actually trying too hard. So before we begin, I want to review a quick few housekeeping items. Our webinar today is being recorded, and everyone will be able to access a recording of the webinar and the presentation slides on NCSL's website. We'll send out an email after the webinar with a link on how to get those slides. But you can actually also download them right now if in the upper right-hand corner of your screen you see a yellow sheet with a blue bar graph in front of it. If you click on that, it's called the Media Library. You can download the slides right now. And throughout the webinar, we encourage everyone to please ask questions. You can do that through typing them into the chat box, which is located on the lower left-hand side of your screen. Stacy and I will be gathering all the questions, and we'll be asking them to our presenter towards the end of the webinar. If we don't have time to get to your questions, we'll be sure to follow up with you via email and hopefully get your question answered. So today we're going to spend a productive 30 minutes learning some tips on how to boost productivity at work while still maintaining a fun life. So in this webinar, you'll discover 10 classic productivity tips that still work today, plus 10 21st century ones you probably didn't know about. We're pleased to have with us today Catherine Andrews, who is Director of Content at GovLoop. GovLoop is a strategic online network for people in and around government. It was founded in 2008, and it aims to foster collaboration and provide expertise and knowledge to government officials, public sector employees, and everyone else who interacts in this world. At GovLoop, Catherine and her team work to create great products that delight, educate, and inspire public sector workers. Before GovLoop, Catherine worked as Director of Digital Content at Homefront Communications and was Editorial Director at Washingtonian.com. Catherine has her master's in online journalism from Northwestern University and received her undergraduate degree at the University of Virginia. She's also worked at CNN.com, DCIS.com, and WashingtonPost.com. So without further ado, Catherine, I'll pass things over to you.
Great, and thank you so much. And I'm very excited to be here. Thank you guys for having me today. And welcome to my presentation. As you heard, it's going to be about classic productivity tips that sort of stand the test of time, and also some apps and other tools that I really like to use that are a little bit more modern. You heard a little bit of my bio. I'm currently GovLoop Director of Content and have previously worked in journalism and social media strategy. And you can follow me on Twitter at @CAndrews. So let's just dive right in. I wanted to talk a little bit about some of my favorite classic productivity tips that still work today. And I really think that a lot of folks, when they talk about productivity today, are really talking about fancy new tools or special techniques that improve how much work you can get done. And I really do think a lot of those can work, and I do use a lot of them. But for me personally, there are also a ton of classic and very basic techniques I still use to improve my productivity. And I think they're still incredibly relevant and important. So I wanted to detail some of them for you. So let's get started. First one that I find really useful is determining your highest leverage activities and then spending the most time on them. So one of my biggest problems at work is getting distracted, and I'm not even talking about getting distracted by like BuzzFeed articles or Facebook, though that does happen. It's getting distracted by mundane day-to-day work things that come in that do need to get done at some point, but end up getting done at the cost of some of the higher level, bigger picture strategy stuff I want to and need to work on. So yes, I need to respond to that sponsor email, but do I need to respond to it while I'm working on a big picture content strategy project? Probably not. So once or twice a week, I really force myself to go to a coffee shop or somewhere else off-site with a list of a few of my big picture projects that are important to me, and I work solely on those. I really think this is important to productivity because making time for these big picture things that you care about will A, make you more engaged in your job because you're not just putting fires out all day, and B, help advance you in your career. So it's great and important to take care of the day-to-day tasks, but it is the big picture strategy stuff that actually gets done and implemented that gets you noticed. So learning to get good at shifting gears quickly. I know a lot of you have bosses that might demand work from you on the spot, and you often have to change priorities and sort of shift gears in what you're doing. And it's really annoying, but it's a reality, and I think it's actually something you can get better at. So what I do and what I've done to sort of get better at that, and what I would recommend to you guys is readjusting your expectations. If this is the way your office works where one project you think is a priority, all of a sudden that drops and you find yourself next minute having to work on something else, it's no good to constantly be getting frustrated when deadlines change and priorities get rejiggered if that's sort of the reality of your job. I really think if you can adjust your mindset to look at this as part of the package with your job and expect it to occur, then it will frazzle you less when it inevitably happens. And beyond that mind shift, if you can make that happen, sort of build this expectation into the schedules you set yourself. If you know that deadlines are always shifting on a moment's notice and that they're just going to cause chaos in your perfectly laid plans, just account for that in your planning. That can mean anything from like scheduling work to be finished earlier than you otherwise would have or getting somebody to sign off earlier in the process. Additionally, I think it's really important to check in with your manager regularly about your priorities. It's super frustrating to focus on Project X all week only to find out on Thursday or whenever that your manager knew on Tuesday that Project Z was going to take priority. So if you are finding that you're not getting updates about changes as quickly as you should, you need to put the onus on yourself to touch base frequently to share what you're working on and how you're prioritizing and find out if anything should change. And so for me, like I said, it's a mindset shift. Personally, this is how my job at GovLoop works too. Priorities are constantly shifting, but I don't mind it because I expect it. So if you're a little bit resentful that this is constantly happening to you, you may just need to adjust your expectations there. It probably is as much as part of your job as the desk where you sit or the time that you're expected to be in at the office. So if you can work to readjust your expectations and accept it, I think it'll help you deal better with that. So moving on to the Pomodoro technique. So you're all here for a training on productivity, which means you probably have some interest in this topic. And so the Pomodoro technique might not be news to you, and you may have already tried it, but I really do love it, and I think it's so effective, so I just couldn't leave it out in this presentation about productivity. For those of you who don't know it, it's a time management method developed by a man named Francesco Cirillo in the late 1980s. A quick overview is that the technique uses a timer to break down work into intervals, traditionally 25 minutes in length, separated by short breaks. And these intervals are known as pomodori, which is the plural of the Italian word pomodoro for tomato. And the method really believes it's based on the idea that frequent breaks actually improve mental agility. So the 5 steps for implementing this technique is, first one, decide on the task to be done. Second, set your timer to X amount of minutes, which is traditionally 25. Third, work on the task until the timer rings. Fourth, take a short break of about 3 to 5 minutes. And after 4 pomodori, go ahead and take a longer break of about 15 to 30 minutes. My next tip is live and die by the 2-minute rule, which I really love. It's sort of this sort of scenario. You might be faced with a minor yet annoying task, and you can't decide whether or not you want to tackle it now or later. And if you do it now, that means you can't go to lunch quite yet, and so you have to email your friend to reschedule. But if you do it later, you know you're going to dread it all afternoon. And so by the time you've either decided to do it or not, you've actually spent 10 minutes rationalizing your decision when actually doing the task would have taken you just 2 minutes. So the basic idea is just if a task is going to take you less than 2 minutes, just do it right now. And it comes from a great book called Getting Things Done. And I really do think it's crazy how many things we put off that we could get done in 2 minutes or less. You know, for example, washing your dishes immediately after your meal, taking out the garbage, cleaning up clutter, sending that one email, and so on. So try it. If a task, if you think it would really take less than 2 minutes to complete, then follow the rule and do it right away. So I'm going to go move on to a few email tips here because I honestly feel that modern email is basically the root of all productivity problems we have today. we have 24/7 access to email, and so everything starts to feel very, very urgent and like an emergency, at least for me. You always feel like you have to respond immediately, but trying to respond to an email as soon as it comes in is actually extremely disruptive to your workflow. When that email notification pops up, I feel like I have to attend to whatever it's about immediately. My thought process is, oh, it'll only take a couple of minutes to get back to this person. It's no big deal. But then somehow before I know it, I've gone down this massive email and internet hole and completely forgotten the project I was working on originally, and it's 45 minutes later. I found a stat that said that office workers spend 28% of their time switching from task to task because they're interrupted. And in 40% of the cases, they actually don't resume the interrupted task in the next 24 hours. So you may want to think about rejiggering the way that you interact with email. And so if I actually want to get anything done, if I've got a project that requires my full attention, I turn off my Outlook, close the Gmail tab, put my phone out of reach so I can't hear it buzzing, and I get to work. I really don't think that anybody's going to be super annoyed if you email them back in a couple of hours instead of a couple of minutes. But I do acknowledge that working for legislators, you can't necessarily turn off your email or respond only every 3 hours. It's not super realistic when you are working during the legislative season. But still, I think you can adjust and use some of these tips and be a little bit more mindful about your email use. And if you can't completely turn off your email, you can learn to group and prioritize emails better. Respond to the truly urgent ones, but try to resist the urge to respond to the non-urgent ones, and instead batch your response time. And that's what I'll talk about in this next slide, sort of the batch approach to responding to email, which I utilize a lot here at GovLoop. Email is hard to tame, but I really do think that responding to it in batches helps. And I think it's sort of a self-imposed thing. You might feel like you need to be on email all of the time, but chances are people might not notice if you check just a little bit less often. I often set myself an email checking schedule and try to stick to it as best I can. And the schedule looks like this. I check email, around when I'm having breakfast. I check it once when I get to work around 8:30. And then I'll check it again at 11 a.m. and then at 3 p.m. And then right before I close out for the day around 5 or 6 p.m. And if you feel like you still need to keep people in the loop about where you are and why you're not responding immediately, consider creating a simple auto reply telling people when you do read or respond to your email and how soon they can expect a reply. And you can also tell them that if they need anything sooner that they can call you and you can provide your cell phone. I will say that with my personal experience using that method, it's something only like 5% of, quote unquote urgent emails are actually followed up with a phone call. So by taking this batch approach, ideally you can give yourself some breathing space to focus on the more important stuff. So if you can't batch and you can't turn off your email, you can at least turn off email alerts, which I think the email is still coming through, but there's something psychological about turning off the alert that comes in every time you get an email. So the option here is just turn off that email alert, whether it's a Gmail or an Outlook. Most of these programs have settings that you can you can set them up as you like. You can choose to get an alert once an hour about your new messages, or every 15 minutes, or every couple of hours. I use Outlook at work personally, and if you go ahead and check through the send and receive settings and just Google that term, you'll be able to define your send and receive groups. And that's sort of a way right there that if you use Outlook, that you can select a schedule for an automatic send and receive, anywhere from half an hour to every couple of hours. All right. I also really love using Outlook Conversation Cleanup for email issues. I think it's a lifesaver for those long threaded conversation emails. This tool sort of evaluates the contents of each message in your conversation, and if a message is completely contained within one of the replies, the previous message is deleted. So here's an illustration of how that works. Say you have Justin, and he sends a message to Melissa and Andrew. Melissa replies to both Justin and Andrew, and in her message body, all of Justin's original messages included. Now Andrew sees Melissa's message and replies to both Justin and Melissa. And Andrew's reply includes all of the previous messages in the conversation. So conversation cleanup will then delete all of the messages except the last one from Andrew, because within that message is a copy of all the previous messages. And so sounds sort of confusing, but hopefully that actually makes sense. And it can sort of clean up your inbox a little bit and make you a little bit more focused, because everything will be in the reply thread of one email. And this one, I'm moving away a little bit from email for my last classic productivity tip to a broader strategy about defining goals and what you need to do. So I think this one is a little difficult, but really important if you can achieve it. And it's just about setting better goals and tasks. It's about being concrete and specific with what you want to do in your work life or your personal life. Every year people probably set the resolution, I'm going to go work out more. But I think that's such an incredibly vague goal that it prevents them from having success in that goal. So if you wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to go work out today, it's actually less effective than coming up with a specific and actionable plan. Something like, I'm going to go to the gym at 8:30 a.m., do 15 minutes on the treadmill at X speed, and then do 3 sets of 8 reps of bench presses, etc. So the more specific you can be in your goals, the more it will help you follow through on them. So that is the transition there from my classic ones, and I'm going to go ahead and move into some of the modern day tools I use, but I think there is a poll that you guys wanted to conduct first.
Yes, we have a poll question that we've just put up on the screen for everybody. This is a little preview of what you will see for the modern day productivity tools. So if you are familiar with some of these, please check all that apply. And we will focus a little bit more on the ones that you're unfamiliar with in the next part of the webinar. And we will answer all questions at the end of the webinar, so keep them coming.
Great, thank you. It's really interesting to see the results here. Not surprising that everybody knows Dropbox, which is one of my favorite tools, and I'll talk a little bit about that. So I'm going to go to a list of my favorite little fun productivity tools that you guys can use. And so these are 10 of my favorite and sort of more newfangled productivity tech tricks and tools. And number one is coffitivity.com, which I think is really fun. Research shows it's actually pretty hard to be creative in a quiet space, but if you guys work in an open office plan like I do here at GovLoop, you know that can also be difficult and loud and make it hard to focus. So this app provides audio mixes to give you some lovely background noises to listen to while you work. Everything from a blend of what it might sound like at a coffee shop to everything, plates clinking, so you can do little snippets of conversation. So I find these provide just enough background noise without becoming annoying. And next up, project management apps. I basically live and die by something called Trello, which you can find at Trello.com, and there's a free version of it you can use. At GovLoop we have 1,000,001 things going on at any one time, with anywhere from 2 to 10 or more people involved in a project. So we needed a way to install an editorial calendar with task assignments and a calendar view. So we use Trello and are very happy with it, but I've also heard great things about Kanban Flow, which is another shared user project management app. Now, so many of you guys use Dropbox, so I won't spend too long on it because it sounds like you all know what it's about. But it's just great for file sharing services across multiple devices. So I can check my Dropbox files from my phone when I'm at home and away from the office, or at any computer or tablet that I might be using. And it's just a great way for us to share transcripts or Word files that we might be working on. Buffer is great for people who do social media as part of their job, or even if social media is a big part of your personal life. It's great for scheduling and content. Buffer lets you compose tweets and status updates, which you then can post across multiple networks at once, and it helps you decide when to post them. You can post them immediately or choose the Add to Buffer option, which lets Buffer decide when to post it based on when might be most popular and the most people in your network might see it. So even if you only check in on social media once a day for 20 minutes, you can be scheduling across several networks all day long. I love Evernote. It's a cross-platform app that serves many purposes. It can be your digital file cabinet, a note-taking tool, a daily journal, task or project management system. It's basically an electronic notebook that integrates across everything. It digitizes your physical notes and backs them up in the cloud, and so you can search across it for any notes or any items you saved. It's basically my digital file cabinet, how I use it. So anything I ever need to reference, I know it's there, and it's easily searchable. IFT, it's pronounced like gift, but without the G. It stands for if this, then that, which creates automation for you amongst tasks when you create what are called personal recipes for the app. So if you find yourself wasting a lot of time with repetitive internet or tech tasks, this can be a time-saving app for you. An example is maybe every time you post a photo to Facebook, you also want to save it to Dropbox. That's two separate actions which can end up taking up your time. But if you create a recipe on IFT that says, every time I post a photo to Facebook, also upload it to Dropbox, IFT does that automatically for you. And as you can imagine, there are countless uses for this sort of service that could save you time. For example, every time you get an email with a receipt on it, you could create an IFT recipe that would automatically share those receipts to a specific Google spreadsheet, which could be super useful when you have to do expenses or even tax time. I really like focusatwill.com. A lot of us like to listen to music while we work, but some music, research shows, makes you not as productive as other kinds of music. So check it out because the technology behind this app claims to deliver a variety of attention-amplifying music channels that help ideally make you more productive. I really like Pocket because I'm always reading articles that are relevant to me at work and to my personal life. But maybe when I see that article or that headline or that link, I don't have the time to read that article right then, but I really want to save it for later. So when that happens to you and you come across an interesting article you want to read later on, go ahead and put it in your Pocket, which is an app that saves links for you to read later in one place. So that way you can still focus on your work at hand, not get distracted by an awesome article, and still make sure you're able to read it later. And Doodle, it sounds like you guys have used this a lot too. It's just a really great way for participants to schedule a group meeting. It's basically a simple poll where everybody who needs to come to a meeting or an event can answer a poll that you set up indicating which days and times work best for them. And then if you're the organizer, you're left with the results of the poll, and you can choose the best time for the majority of the participants, which means no more long email threads and the confusion of trying to accommodate a huge group. And my last one is 1Password, and there are actually a variety of different services out there, but I use 1Password, which is a password management app. And I'm sure everybody out there has had that sort of experience where you probably have 30 or 40 different passwords for different services that you might forget one day, and so you have to spend time resetting that password and then re-entering it on the site and over again. So I really think those precious minutes that are lost in password recovery can sort of add up and kill your productivity. But this one, something like 1Password, basically manages all of your passwords in one place, which I find saves me a lot of time. All right, and that is it. I want to thank you guys so much, and I know that you guys probably have some questions, so I'm happy to turn it back over to the moderators.
Great. Thank you, everyone. This is Stacy Householder with NCSL, co-moderating with Melanie. And we really appreciate you listening into this webinar. And thank you so much, Catherine, for sharing your insight. Some of those I definitely have taken notes on and will be employing in the near future. We have some questions that have come in through the chat box and also a lot of other recommendations. So thank you all for sending reminders in, like remembering to set the time zone on Doodle or suggesting Meeting Wizard as well as Doodle. Those are all really great suggestions and other ones that we didn't mention here. So keep those coming. The first question that we have is about the Eisenhower time matrix. So Catherine, I don't know if you have ever heard of this or not, but if you have, if you could speak to it, or we could take some time and look it up offline.
I have heard of it. I don't remember exactly the details, but I know when I look at other productivity articles, it is mentioned a fair amount of time. So whoever put that in the chat box, if you want to detail exactly what it's about, I would love to know more details about it, because I am always on the lookout about more strategies or approaches to refining my productivity.
Great. Well, we appreciate that. We'll look into that, and then we could certainly send an email to everyone who's on the webinar and follow up on that method. You mentioned Evernote as a good tool to keep track of multiple tasks, tips, or advice on how to have a I'm sorry. I'm mixing my questions here. You mentioned Evernote as a good tool to keep track of multiple tasks or priorities. Is that comparable to OneNote?
So I actually use OneNote as well, and I use it in a different way. So I might not be maximizing the capabilities of OneNote, but I use OneNote when I have several different files I need to end up combining into one product. So I might have a transcript of an interview, and then my outline, and then some stats, and then finally a tab that has my full article in it. And OneNote, the way I use it is basically like a tabbed Microsoft Word file, so that you can be referencing several documents at once and them together. Evernote is more like you can just be saving files and terms in one centralized location. So and then you can access it via your mobile device as well. So if you are saving some links or some articles, or maybe even like a recipe that you want to try on your desktop, later on you can search cucumbers if it's a cucumber-based recipe and not have to know exactly where it was, and then Evernote will pull that up for you really quick.
Pretty cool. The last, I'm sorry, not the last one, but the next question we have is, a lot of us have to go to a lot of meetings with many different people, and the productivity of meetings has been hotly contested. Could you speak to what makes a productive meeting?
Yeah, that's something I think everybody struggles with, and I think for me it's really about a clear definition up front that is put in writing and reemphasized to all of the attendees. One person who is empowered with running the meeting according to the agenda that's been preset, and then 5 minutes at the end of the meeting where you take time to repeat what concrete steps come next out of the meeting. It's really difficult because if it's your boss who is running these terrible meetings, there's not a ton you can do there just because, but you can suggest, I think, really making those clear asks and a clear agenda at the beginning, a really important part of the meetings, and if you can integrate that into the culture of your office, that'll be helpful. When I create an agenda for a meeting, I also make sure it's in the Outlook invite for everybody who's attending the meeting. And something as simple as that has helped people remind themselves which tasks we're actually supposed to be tackling in the meeting. But I really can't recommend the end part, those 5 minutes when you reiterate the next 5 to 10 steps or whatever you need to do coming out of the meeting, I think are very important. I've been to too many meetings where it'll go on for an hour and then sort of wraps up and everybody's like, well, what happens next? And it's never really stated, and then that just is going to require another meeting down the line because there was no clarity around it.
Thanks for sharing that. A big concern among legislative staff in particular is that these apps and program suggestions are great, but that there are some strict IT controls or rules around desktops and what legislative staff can add to their desktops. Do you have any suggestions for approaching IT departments in terms of allowing use?
Yeah, well, one, I would also recommend see if you can find some browser-based apps. In Trello, you can access it's browser-based, and you don't have to install anything, and a couple of these other ones are as well. And so it sometimes may just be a matter of taking my suggestions, but Googling around for stuff that works for you that you don't actually have to install separately. But I think it's just a matter of being reasonable and articulating a clear business case for a particular app if you have to convince somebody to let you install it. So if you can, clearly and, what they're doing for you is for your own security. And I find that people get frustrated with IT folks, because it does impede a lot of things that you want to be doing, but they are trying to keep you secure and they do have a job to do. So if you can come up with a clear business case for why this app will make your job much easier and have it written out and go to them and just have a conversation, I think that could get you a long way.
Thanks so much. We have a request. If you could talk a little bit more or repeat how to get Outlook to delete repeated messages and email strands, and we'll go ahead and flip back to that slide as well.
Yeah, that's called Outlook Conversation Cleanup. And so I actually run Outlook on a Mac, and I don't know if you guys use different computers or different platforms, so sometimes the instructions are different depending on the version of Outlook that you're using. But I think if you just go ahead and Google Outlook Conversation Cleanup, you'll find the instructions about how to enable that.
Great. Thanks for following up on that one. How may this advice differ between more junior staff and more senior staff?
Well, that's a tough one, and I mean, that's sort of always the question. You know, junior staff may have great ideas or ways of changing things, but not feel like they're empowered to talk to senior staff about these ideas. But it sort of goes back, in my opinion anyways, to the conversation that you might have with the IT staff. Most people, you know, are at your office ideally to do a good job and do it as fast and well as possible. And so if the question is, and it might be a different question, but what I'm hearing it as is if you're sort of encouraging others and maybe senior staff to use these productivity tools, you know, it's going through and making that business case and sort of a clear argument about why this makes sense for your office to adapt something like this or to think about doing these ways, and to not, you know, be afraid to talk to senior staff about it. They, at least at GovLoop, and I'm sure in many other organizations, want to hear ideas from everybody. And so really just sort of gathering a little bit of courage and making sure you have a clear case for why your idea is a good one and will help your organization.
All right, we will do two more questions. One is, you mentioned the book, Getting Things Done. Do you tend to use everything in that book, or do you just pick out what works for you?
I don't think I use everything in anything. Productivity is an incredibly subjective thing for so many people. We just published an article on GovLoop about a guide to procrastination, which actually, if you think about the ways you procrastinate and sort of use those to your advantage, can make you more productive, sort of as counterintuitive as that might sound. And I was reading the article and discovered I'm what I think is called an efficient procrastinator, which just means I often put off projects I don't want to do, but I'll just do everything else that I have to do before them. Still procrastinating, but it's like semi-productive. So I really think it's just knowing yourself and what works for you in terms of productivity, and just trying out different tips. The Pomodoro technique, you might find it totally torturous and awful and may never want to use it. But it's really about knowing what works for you, and then understanding that other people are the same way, that some productivity things won't work for them that do work for you, and sort of just encouraging everybody to find the tasks and the tips and the tools that work specifically for them.
All right, and then the last question that we have is that this is a lot of really great information, and I may not be able to employ them all at once. If you had to pick just one to start out with or to try from your old techniques or your new techniques, which one would you recommend to start with?
That's a tough one. I think if I can cheat a little bit and use a couple, if you can go off-site for even an hour or two a week and sit down and work on bigger picture stuff, I think that is really important, because even if you're putting out fires the rest of your week and dealing with changing priorities, you still got that space to just calm yourself a little bit and focus on the projects that are important to you in bigger picture. And that's important because that will lead you to be more engaged in your job. And research does show that people who are more engaged in their job are more productive because they're more motivated. They want to get more stuff done. They become a little bit more efficient. So find the ways and the things that keep you engaged in your job. Make time for those things, and I do think that will lead to an increase in productivity.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Catherine. This has been really enlightening. A number of you have started to have conversations and asking for techniques and tips about what you do in your own legislative offices. If you want to connect with NCSL staff, we've put our email address up here on the screen at ymt@ncsl.org. Please go ahead and shoot us an email, and we would be happy to connect you with other legislative staff so you can continue the conversation offline offline and get to know some of your peers in other states. Again, Catherine, thank you so much. This has been just great techniques and options for us to explore going forward. And thank you, everyone, for logging in today and taking time out of your day. We promised you a half hour, and we're just slightly over that, so we will let you get back to the rest of your day and start employing some of these productivity techniques. Thank you, everyone, and on behalf of young and new professionals, we hope to see you at another event in the future.